Hello and welcome to the Cisco AI Insights Podcast, where every month we invite a technology or AI expert to the show to highlight and discuss trends, news, and academic papers from the worlds of AI, machine learning, and data science. I am one of your hosts, Rafael Herrera, and my co-host is a machine learning engineer and data scientist in Cisco's customer experience team, Sónia Marques. How's your day going?
Going great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a nice day, a little warm, but I am excited about today because we are exploring the idea of a compounding knowledge base and how the LLM wiki pattern helps build one by moving beyond ephemeral chat sessions towards a persistent digital brain that can organize, refine, and retain knowledge over time. We also are looking at how this kind of agentic memory can strengthen sentiment analysis, capture the nuance of human language more effectively, and support more reliable AI systems by turning raw language data into a portable, structured, and scalable knowledge base. And to help us unpack all of this and what it means in practice, we are joined by Cisco software engineer João Costa. João, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Oh, good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here because actually, one thing that's different about this particular episode is not an academic paper. This is something you found on GitHub. Is that right? A gist. I don't travel the world of GitHub as much as you folks. So I'm assuming it's like a blog, but for GitHub. Is that right?
Yeah, kinda. So I found this just browsing, and I think it's been doing some laps on the AI space, let's say, which is a gist from Andrej Karpathy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It has been making rounds because it creates an overview of a possible LLM wiki system where we have some sort of knowledge base that gets built over time and cross-links like any good wiki is through our own guidelines that we provide the system and can be very useful in a lot of different contexts.
And I think you mentioned it is by Karpathy on Gist. And I will be linking this in the show notes. So if anyone wants to look at this, they can go ahead and click on it, look at it. And I think you can even clone it and play with it at home if you want to. But before you do that, please finish listening to this podcast. We're going to tell you how great it is and all the amazing things you can do. So, Xiao, go ahead, jump in. First off, tell us what it is. How does it really work for us? And what problem is it actually solving?
So the gist itself is basically a collection of ideas from Karpathy, provides a sort of blueprint to how an LLM wiki could be set up. So we're familiarized with the concept of LLMs, and we're familiarized with the concept of a wiki, Wikipedia being the best known wiki by default. But there are a lot of other wikis out there. One that is mentioned specifically is, for instance, the Lord of the Rings.
A good one.
The Lord of the Rings fan wiki contains a whole bunch of information about anything Lord of the Rings related. And the power of a wiki is not only in its several different pages, but also the cross links between them. So having a knowledge base that links the knowledge in between itself, creating a natural graph of the knowledge itself is super useful. It's easy for querying stuff. It is very powerful in determining your sort of knowledge clusters in between different pages. You can naturally divide wikis into different sections based on the things that you're talking about in the different pages. And LLM wiki concept comes from a necessity that arises when using LLMs for pretty much any task, but more specifically for more day-to-day tasks of general productivity, development work, and whatnot. And that is context. LLMs thrive on having a very rich context of your current workspace needs, etc. And if you provide that context, you can have much better results from those LLM responses. They are more guided towards you, they are clearer, etc. The thing is, LLMs by themselves don't have any sort of context memory or anything like that. They do have the context of each LLM, which can be quite large, like 2 million tokens is a quite large context, but eventually you will want to have different sessions to tackle different problems. And The sort of idea of an LLM wiki is to have an underlying base of knowledge that can be extracted from raw sources of data to create a knowledge base that is tailored to your needs and that can then be injected, let's say, into the context of an LLM call, and with that, use that information to have more personal responses and to improve the knowledge base itself.
So you would say that is more for a personal use and not necessarily for a production system that you would like to use this type of system. Is that the case?
Currently, yes, I think. It might be a case where this sort of idea evolves over time and it does create a production ready system that can take advantage of this sort of underlying idea of a knowledge base using the sort of wiki page concept. Right now, I think it's mostly being used either to set up a personal assistant that has the same knowledge that you have, for instance, for your work or for writing a book or something like that, or for academic research, and be being used to create some sort of product that encompasses A. So what I mean is there are already some of this sort of LLM wiki idea, but they tend to be sold in quotation marks as personal sort of assistants. There doesn't seem to be at least I haven't found a production system that uses this sort of underlying idea to improve LLM responses, agentic use cases, and whatnot. In general, I think those, and in my opinion as well, those sort of systems tend to be better off with more, I would say, formal sorts of querying and knowledge storage, be it vector databases for performing RAG, other sort of static databases. I think in production, you need some sort of stable sort of backbone.
Now, you mentioned something actually that I wanted to touch on when you mentioned previously that this is entirely based on raw sources of data. The first thing that popped into my head is something like Notebook LM, RAG, and then you mentioned that again. So, what makes this particularly different is that it's like RAG, but it moves, it does things. It's not just a book sitting on a shelf, it is a book that's been downloaded into your brain, like that, right?
Yeah. So I think the main difference between a RAG system and this sort of LLM wiki is that when you have an LLM plus RAG, or I should say LLM plus vector database for RAG, what you tend to have in terms of a general workflow is that you have a whole bunch of documents. Those documents get processed, stored, and embedded in a vector database, and then that database can be later queried for similar sort of information and can be easily retrieved. In this case, in the sort of LLM wiki concept, we're not strictly working with a clear workflow like that. We're not going from a raw source of data, processed and static, living somewhere, and then we query that knowledge. What we're doing is a bit more dynamic and informal. So where we do have the concept of a raw source of data that could either be like, I don't know, meeting transcripts, websites, anything like that. And then we set up our LLM wiki repository, let's say, in such a way that those sources of data are used to synthesize wiki pages, pretty much. Those wiki pages can be adapted to be whatever you need them to be. In my personal case, I've been using it for development work. So I have specific pages for meetings that I have, decisions that were made, tasks that I need to do, etc. But it's rather flexible.
One thing that you mentioned previously that is very important in this workflow is that there are these wiki pages, but there is also links between the concepts that are covered in those wikis. So, for example, if I'm, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm trying to build a wiki on a subject that I'm very interested in and as I want to do like a research project. And I can use as my sources a bunch of academic articles that I downloaded from the web, and I pasted in the source folders. Then the LLM will ingest it, synthesize, and then create my wiki with all those wiki pages and the relationships between the concepts that it found. And then I can query that wiki on whatever way I want. While with RAG, I think what it's like its biggest fault is that it will rank the academic papers that I give it to it like for a top 5, but it will have a difficult time linking the ideas. And maybe there was like, if I was to go for a top 6, it would be slightly better. And I just missed that information. And I think this LLM wiki is way more like broad knowledge interconnected, which is so much more similar to the way that we think. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about is, so I've heard a lot about Obsidian in isolated, but I know Obsidian is also used in this to use the LLM wiki. How does this flow work? Well, how is this tool like work in separation versus integrated in an LLM wiki? Can you give me like the gist of it?
So Obsidian, I've known about Obsidian even before sort of AI boom, because Obsidian is a very simple tool. It is designed to be a very simple tool with a very clear objective, which is it's just a local reader and editor of Markdown files with cross-linking capabilities. So for instance, I think Obsidian came from a need that people were having more and more of sort of declouding themselves, I'd say, instead of having everything in the cloud, living somewhere that someday it might not be available. You have it in Obsidian, and Obsidian is just a reader. You can go through your different files. It reads Markdown files. You can interconnect them, etc. However, when this sort of AI boom came through, where a lot of stuff was being defined by Markdown files and whatnot, Obsidian became a very clear tool to have a look into those Markdown files. I think in general, Obsidian was not built in mind for AI empowered sort of workflows, but it does fit the bill very nicely. In the end, Obsidian is just like your text editor that you can use to very easily identify crosslinks between different Markdown pages. And in our case, with LLM, the LLM wiki concept to identify cross references between bits and pieces of knowledge. So in the end, what we have is Obsidian as our IDE, where we have easy access and we can easily search through the whole knowledge base that we have. But the LLM is our scribe. So it reads whatever sources of information you give it, it creates and curates a whole bunch of wiki pages, and then you can easily search those wiki pages through Obsidian.
So it sounds kind of like Obsidian does a lot of the heavy lifting of connecting things together. It's kind of the backbone where if you can interlink these different ideas, these thoughts, these concepts and everything, it's connected and how they relate to each other. But this LLM wiki that you're talking about knows and makes sense of all of those connections in a greater way and actually connects it to an LLM so it can do things for you. Is that pretty much it? Am I getting that right?
Yes, I think Obsidian in this case is most useful for visualizing the knowledge base, and the LLM is the thing that creates and curates the knowledge base itself. So Obsidian by itself doesn't have any sort of AI capability, but what it allows you to do is to have a very nice window, let's say, to your underlying knowledge base. So the LLM sort of creates the knowledge base, identifies related entities with each other, and then you can, through Obsidian, navigate through them.
It's a very cool and new concept that has a lot of potential and a lot of use cases. One thing that is also mentioned a lot in the gist from Karpathy is the concept of linking this wiki page. Can you talk to us about that concept?
Yes, linting a thing like an LLM wiki is, I'd say, the most important thing in such a system. And it is the key differentiator between this sort of knowledge base structure compared to some others. Linking a knowledge base is an essential step that we as humans have. We naturally forget about stuff that is irrelevant or outdated or whatnot. And with that, we keep our knowledge base, our brain knowledge base, always up to date. We forget about stuff that is useless, and we keep in the back of our mind, literally, the stuff that is relevant for us at a given point in time. Linting is also a essential step on a traditional wiki, be it Wikipedia, a fan wiki, or something like that. The power to create wiki pages and interconnect them with other wiki pages is meaningless if there isn't linking and curation of said wiki pages. Wikipedia is generally a great source of information because not only it is quite easy to edit and create wiki pages, but also there's a very big community of, let's call them linkers, but editors, commenters, etc., that ensure that the quality of those wiki pages is kept as high as possible. And that's the thing that we have with a programmatic scheduled linking of an LLM wiki knowledge base. It makes sure that as you're ingesting different sources of data, the LLM might naturally pick up different contradictions between different pieces of information. And that might come from intrinsic differences in those bits and pieces of information. We, as humans, also get fed contradictory pieces of information all the time. And we naturally need to link out the right answer from the wrong answer, per se. In the case of an LLM wiki, we need that sort of linking process to not only resolve those sort of contradictions that might exist between temporarily distant pieces of information, but also because LLMs are intrinsically not deterministic and might hallucinate wrong pieces of information. If that is the case, if we didn't have linking on an LLM wiki, if we just allowed a piece of information, be it in just a single line of a single wiki page in an LLM, it could lead to a sort of contamination of the whole knowledge base, where that just single piece of wrong information might be used as a base for other pieces of information that naturally are generated as the wiki matures. And in the end, you might come across a state of the LLM wiki that is so stale and outdated and contradictory with itself and wrong, pretty much, that it becomes useless as a knowledge source or a knowledge base.
The topic for this month's podcast is compounding knowledge base. So obviously, if you have one piece of bad information, it will, sounds like, compound and just ruin the whole thing. One bad apple can ruin the entire bunch. And it seems like it definitely applies to something like this and our fun AI toys. So that's good. It sounds like with LLM Wiki, you have the LLM doing the editing, but the wiki is the guide to do the editing correctly. Am I getting that part right, at least?
Yes, it reminds me of when I was in ninth grade studying for history tests. You have a raw source of information, which is your history textbook. And at least for me, the easiest way that I had to study history specifically was just to create summaries of whatever was the curriculum of a specific test that I needed to study to. In this case, the LLM wiki is doing the synthesizing, the summarization part. The source of data is whatever it needs to be. And then you have a easy to access, easy to query, and easy to read wiki where you can quickly check, oh, actually, what was that king's name from 700 something? And you can easily check there and you have the knowledge you need at the back of your mind always.
That's a good point because I think it could make the memorization process way easier to always see the links laid out. It can make it way easier to understand all those concepts and how they connect with each other. Another thing that I wanted to ask is you mentioned how this tool is more appropriate for personal use rather than a production system. I know production systems are the most strict and they need to be very stable. It's the highest bar. But what if I just wanted to use it for a research project that I'm doing with a colleague or with a friend? How would that collaboration work? Would it be possible? Do you have any experience on that, or can you anticipate how that would work?
Collaboration can be made easy through an LLM wiki because, in the end, an LLM wiki is just a whole bunch of markdown files that have references to one another that are stored in a structured directory of your choice. So, if you just create a Git repo out of that sort of structured and markdown files, you immediately have a versioned knowledge base that you can use and share with other people, and they can enrich that knowledge base as they see fit. They can branch out, fork out, etc.
One specific question: would I commit only the markdown files from the wiki or also the sources?
I don't know because I've never used
Yeah.
an LLM wiki in that way. It's sort of a gray area there. If you wanted just the base knowledge and share that sort of base knowledge, you just commit the wiki files themselves. Although I think the biggest advantage and power of such a system is to always have the sort of raw data easily accessible, because if you identify something later that, for instance, contradicts an original bit of information that you had, or somewhere the LLM hallucinates a false piece of information, if you have the source data to back you up, you can always ensure that contradictions are correctly identified, and then you can wint out, you can ignore certain bits of information that were wrongly created, let's say. I think an LLM wiki, or sort of the wiki concept, can be applied to a whole bunch of different contexts, including studying for some exam or doing academic research and whatnot. My personal experience creating by hand those sort of wikis to study history or something like that, the value that I got from that process was the process itself, specifically studying for that process, creating the notes, summarizing, synthesizing. In the LLM wiki case, we lose the knowledge that we gain by creating the process manually. On one hand, we gain a whole bunch of speed and efficiency because we can just have an LLM process 100 different documents, create all of the necessary wiki pages to map out different entities and concepts that were identified, cross-link them between each other, and that's great. But if we are looking for a more personal sort of interaction with an LLM wiki, we might lose some nuance, some subtleties during that synthesizing step, just because we're delegating it to someone else. However, that is not to say that I think these sort of systems are not useful. I just think we just need to consider the different applications for a given system. Like using an LLM wiki, at least personally, if the sort of AI state that we're in right now was available when I was studying history in ninth grade, I wouldn't benefit from a wiki like this just because the value that I got was by creating the wiki. If so, however, there are scenarios where the wiki itself is the useful part. So, for my day to day work developing code and whatnot, the wiki itself is the most valuable part because there I can get a distilled, summarized, synthesized state of current affairs. Let's say I can check meeting notes that were automatically created from a meeting last week, and from there I can identify what decisions were made, and from those decisions I can check what tasks are needed, and from there I can have an overview of the things that I need to do for my day to day. Synthesizing step in this case, it's just not that relevant. Personally, for me, I don't need to go and watch again a meeting transcript or a meeting recording and take notes again, because I do that while I'm on the meeting. So not really a point there. But wait, not really a point there. but it always depends on the end use case that you have. If you want a wiki to be just a wiki, a source of information that you can query, then an LLM wiki is perfectly acceptable for a lot of cases. If the value that you gain is by synthesizing data yourself, then a wiki might not be the best application.
So what you're saying is if you were using one of these when you were studying, you probably wouldn't have learned a thing. Is basically what you're saying.
Yes, precisely. I wouldn't actually ingrain the knowledge that I needed to cram into my brain. I wouldn't learn a thing. Yes, that is correct. However, if we were to use it as a sort of base of knowledge to then do other stuff, maybe a wiki on that subject would be enough.
We are probably not going to be using it for studying, which is probably good because we wouldn't learn anything. But as an assistant for you, while you're doing all of your actual coding and work, it sounds like it is the perfect assistant for an assistant. So it just adds that backbone, that context so that it can efficiently help you achieve what you need to achieve. It's still delivering something at the very least, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'll admit it. I am a human being and I get bored during meetings.
I don't know a human being that doesn't.
Having that sort of 100% concentration threshold during a meeting is very difficult for me, for anyone, I assume, at different levels, of course. But having this sort of system that can synthesize raw data, in case of a meeting, transcripts of said meeting, it's much easier to make sure that you didn't forget anything, that all that you needed to capture was captured.
This is the promise of an AI agent. They can be our assistant doing all the annoying tasks that we don't want to, like paying attention in a meeting or something. And it sounds like this is the perfect structure for doing such a thing. I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us about that because I have heard of something similar to this, especially with all the AI agents out in the world. You've got your OpenClaw, but I've heard of something, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Obviously, we may have brought it up at some point. It is another AI agent, Hermes AI, which has something similar built into it where it learns, it can refine, it can build itself around a certain knowledge base. But it's clear that this basis for AI agents is here to stay. And I think it's only going to iterate into something a little bit more powerful than what we have now. Thank you for giving us a heads up on that. And now all of you can try it at home if you want to, because I'm going to link the GitHub repo for everybody. So go ahead and try it at home. See what you think. Either way, you could try it at home. And if you like conversations with experts about AI, machine learning, and all the other emerging data science technologies rapidly shaping our world, please subscribe to the feed because we have conversations like this all the time. In fact, every month. And we want you along for the ride so you can learn all the amazing things that are coming out and how you can apply them to your own world, much like our friend here has applied it to his meeting survival kit. Until next month, I am Rafael. I've got Sónia here, and we have João. Thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up and talking to us about this LLM wiki. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.